Hey, welcome back. Yvonne Wakefield, YouTube channel podcast on Babe in the Woods, building a life one log at a time. We just finished this book, 32 chapters. I did it upstairs in my beautiful riverfront studio apartment. Arturo suggested we film the second book, Babe in the Woods, self-portrait, down in my studio. And so we've set up down here where I'll be reading this book, which is kind of prophetic because the second book talks also about my development as an artist. So you can also see some of the development going on in my art. And I also teach kids from every ability and age level down here. And every time we shoot this down here, I'm going to show you either some of my work or some of my students' work. And that'll be a story in itself. So we finished up the first book. I'd spent nearly a year up at the cabin. I built the cabin. It was winter. I decided I needed to get out because I had to backpack out in snow. It was not mentally healthy or physically healthy for me to be up there alone in that environment. So I went to Eugene and got enrolled in college. And this is kind of where this book begins, but I had this situation where I could stay at my cabin without rent in the summers. So this covers about 3 of those summers. So Babe in the Woods, self-portrait. I'm just going to read a note from the author, and it says, "My story is recounted as truthfully and sequentially as permissible and collaborated by handwritten and published journals excerpts. All of the places and characters and events depicted in this work of nonfiction are real. The names of some of the characters have been changed to omit or protect identities and details of the living or the dead. Dialogue is drawn directly from my personal reference material and recollections." These are actually physical journals I kept for years and kept them in plastic milk crates, and I finally burned most of them. So prologue. And I got to be on this, like, my painting stool, so I get to move a lot. Did you get my dogs in here? They're not in, a little bit, okay. The dogs are on a different couch. So prologue. Bears had never bothered me before. I shot one that summer on the mountain. As a borderline vegetarian, I reasoned since I deliberately killed an animal, I had to eat a bit of animal deliberately killed. Not entirely to restore karmic equilibrium, but so I could also chew upon the carnal rush of slaughter. On that summer day, when hummingbirds drilled air hot enough to bake vanilla smells out of ponderosa pine, I waited, primed to kill, on my log cabin porch. When a black bear parted brush and stopped midway in crossing the creek, I grasped a 30-30 rest beam on my thigh, leveled it on a 2x4 nailed across the railing, aimed, fired. The bear's eyes blew open in shock before it faltered, staggered upright, and bolted in a tilted gait, upwind of a bullet so immediately embraced. Days after that bear had been found, I felt the need to eat meat to restore the cosmic balance knocked off kilter. A mere trigger squeeze is all it took. It had to be wild. Killed in the wild and not from the bear I shot. I bummed a frozen elk steak from a rusty hunter. After it was thawed, I roasted the meat on a green willow stick over a twiggy fire beside the flashing creek, within spitting distance of where, only days before, I'd blown out a black bear's rib bone with a borrowed rifle at 300 feet. I seared venison until it was as brown as the branch piercing it, until flames licked away and nearly blackened what cardinal red was left of an animal that, like the bear, had browsed a season before upon pale green shivery shoots. When it cooled, I bit into that charred chunk and chewed. The creek continued to flow. The forest practiced its natural order. Every leaf, twig, pine needle rock, and pine needle cone enforced its report. But the animal in me got riled up, and I choked up before I could swallow the fear that had taken us back down. Miles above Oregon's John Day Valley, I felled, bucked, skinned, notched, and chinked a log cabin together from trees. Douglas, red and white fir, and tamarack to classify a predominant few. I was a skinny 18-year-old fresh out of orthodontic braces when I began to rebuild the home lost 4 years before, when orphan replaced the name of daughter. So I'm stopping here. So if you haven't read the first book, my parents were dead when I was 14. They left a small inheritance for me, which I took when I was 18 and bought 80 acres in the mountains and went up to build a log cabin with no idea of what I was doing. This continues the story. The road leading to my backwood home is so rutted and steep, even the most souped up, air-shocked, four-wheel drives lose traction in stretches named for disasters at these places. The Eliminator and Shit and Slide are but two. Given the amount of rain or snow, it is often swifter and safer to hike than it is to drive this road that ends beneath indigenous peaks named after a blushing berry. I live here alone when I am not involved in occupations to bank income so I can buy time to live off the grid and ungirded. This log cabin is the only place I have to call home. It seems as empty as I feel when I am not there. There is no lock on the door. John Day, the city, is a north and central city sharing the same name with a valley, river, country, and a dead trapper. Most of my close friends here call me Yvonne. This mispronunciation twists off tongues conditioned to calling out the likes of women with names like Artist, Nadine, Emmeline, Delilah, or Octavia. Names solid as the pioneering women who lived up to them, unadorned with luxuries I take for granted in a country where Yvonne sounds too pampered, too proper. Sometimes, depending on the work I'm bungling, tasks that involve steely, razor-sharp, pointy tools, trees, and dirt, I will also answer to dimwit, addlebrain, and loser. Dumbass or dumb shit occasionally interweave into my own self-calling. The summer I shot the bear, I added murderer to my list of nicknames, despite the fact I was a conscientious objector and abided by Gandhi's teaching, one of his lessons being, there are many causes that I am prepared to die for, but no cause that I am prepared to kill for. I'd convoluted my practice of his philosophy by dispatching an animal I was not prepared to die for. A rational impulse. Either a bear was going to get me, or I was going to get a bear. Who did who first? I bet one's good fortune. A rifle greatly leveraged my winning odds. On a pine board shelf next to my loft bed among erudite tomes and decades outdated encyclopedias is a hardback copy of The Prophet. The once shiny cover now scuffed and dog-eared. I keep that book beside me when I sleep in belief that dreaming beside Gibran's soul-filled words generates a token of divine light, like a halo surrounding this solitary life, wrestling me to the mat. One passage is underlined and read again and again. Your living is determined not so much by what life brings to you as by the attitude you bring to life. Not so much by what happens to you as by the way your mind looks at what happens. I am 22. My family is dead. What I call home is a stack of logs in the Strawberry Mountains. My best friend is a cat. Out of principle for life, until I ate that venison, I didn't eat furry things. This is what I looked at. All right, we're going to go into chapter 1. Chapter 1, the telling part, just kind of recapsulates how I got up here. 4 years before disturbing bears, I'd left behind a disturbed past, born with the deaths of my parents and convoluted by foster care. The night orphan stamped my fate, I lay in bed wondering how I was going to survive until that first grief-soaked dawning. The next day, a month was too far off to envision a life lacking familiar foundation. Where and how I would live was unimaginable in this sudden free-for-all of abandon. Untethered in a new darkness, I had a vision. Nothing too woo-woo, metaphysical, more like a Christless epiphany, or maybe it was just merely a wishful thought. When I became of legal age, I would build a cabin from trees, live there with a cat, make art, write poetry, and drink cold duck. I had imbibed the sweet, sparkling wine only once, a stolen sip from an adult's glass left unattended at some wedding reception or funeral wake. I don't remember what the occasion was marked by joy or sorrow, but never forgot how the sweet bubbles burst. Bother. At age 18, in search of this dreamed property in a roundabout way, I stopped in John Day, a rural city named after a long-dead trapper from Kentucky. Like his traveling pal, Daniel Boone, John Day also headed west in search of pelted fortunes. But while Boone found fame exploring the wilderness, Day lost part of himself in a wedge of Oregon, now bearing his name, land where I answered the question, where? With the help of a realtor named after a bird, his name was really Robin, and wearing a cowboy hat I purchased, with funds saved during my parents' lifetime, an 80-acre spring-fed draw with serpentine slopes and gold old-growth pines shaded by strawberry mountains. My experiences with logs at that time was limited to miniature interlocking wood beams inside an iconic toy box. Remember Lincoln logs? I had no recollection they'd factor into my life later. In 6 months, with help learning to wield tools that tested and wore me to the metal, I finished cutting, bucking, skinning trees into a 2-story log cabin with walls chinked tight. In 1975, at age 19, I answered the question, how? And moved into my dream home with a tortoise-shelled cat named after a large tree. So if you remember in the first book, the cat was named Tamarack, and he was weaned too soon from his mother, so he always sucked the buttons of my shirt. The first year on the mountain, I removed my Timex wristwatch and learned to divine time by temperature and elemental outpourings in all degrees and moisture magnitude. Built off the grid before the term was popularized, living without electricity, telephone, or running water meant simply that. Instead of turning on an allied faucet, I turned on my legs, running back and forth, knees adjusting to the weight of buckets filled from fiddlehead fern-laced creek waters. Instead of dialing a thermostat, a diamond match ignites tinder to flamey heat inside a stove of welded cast iron. Kerosene lamps spotlight the papery pages I read or draw upon into the long, dark nights that begin after a cocktail hour I never toasted as an underage recluse. By the time fall gave summer the boot, I was snug in my 24-foot by 24-foot log cabin, and my best friends were a chainsaw, a poleaxe, and a cat named Tamarack. It is built on a north slope, and this means by October daylight fades and evening begins at 4:30 p.m. When I'm indoors feeding flames and balancing ballpoint cursive furrows on blue lines in notebooks or drawing out my guts in indelible ink. In between literary or artistic ramblings, I nibbled cheese and crackers while sharpening chainsaw teeth with a bastard filed, a cat with mother's separation anxiety in my lap. In the first part of November, tamarack exchanged their lush lime green fox golden needles that fall away, turning these stately trees into contrasting x-rays against winter's filmy sky. By the end of November, nights are so cold they freeze a 1-pound Tillamook cheese hard as a brick inside the aluminum Coleman. Coleman is the container freezer on the porch, and I still have that. The cooler is brought inside. Outside, snow covers the road, necessitating that I leave my vehicles parked 2 miles below the cabin. Town is 13 miles away, and getting there to buy supplies becomes a day-long event. Before sunrise, I layer an empty backpack with library books and dirty laundry. At first light, I bank the snow with large, damp logs, close the door, then strap on waxed cherry wood cross-country skis. So this is when I had like wood skis with bear trap bindings, and you had to like warm up the wax on the wood stove and caulk it down on the skis before I could go sliding. Since then, I've graduated to other skis. But that's how I was doing it back then. So I caulked down the skis, and I slush and mush until the incline steepens, and then ditch the skis again against a pine tree. Hiking becomes a brisker means of negotiating shin-high drifts. The 3/4-ton 1962 Ford pickup oxidized army green that I bought used from a rancher in a cow pasture is covered in the same amount of snow I just plowed through. The 1974 gleaming Barney Green American Motors Gremlin, a gift from my grandfather purchased off the showroom floor, is totally buried. The Gremlin could never make the grade to the cabin, and after November, skies threw down snow blankets that covered the ground into May. Neither could the high chassis Ford. However, chained up, the truck can make it to the county road that butts into the salt-licked highway leading to town. The Gremlin stayed snowbound until the day I drove it away from what had finished me. To get to town that first winter on the mountain, I fumble off with freezing fingers. Oh, I hate putting on chains. Fumble off with freezing fingers the same icy tire chains took hooked on 4 miles back, then drive the plowed asphalt road leading to places where voices articulate outside the ones in my head. The process of changing bills and coins for groceries and hardware leaves me at times short on words. Tongue-tied, I rush transactions in order to get back to the cabin where my conversational skills are more compatible with a cat and inanimate objects. The cabin is furnished, and Arturo, I want you to put a picture of the real cabin, not an AI-generated cabin. Make sure he does that. The cabin is furnished with family keepsakes, a maple rocking chair, dinette set, various straight-back chairs, oriental carpets, silver bowls, and heirloom Japanese ceramics, and cloisonné fragile precious on booktops chiseled to fit log curves. Moved half away across the country, they are now arranged in a space seemingly incongruous to their last placement, an urban split-level home. So before I moved into the cabin after my parents died, my stuff was in storage. And then when I built the cabin, I took the stuff out of storage and I had it in like a U-Haul trailer below the cabin. And I started to move in my family stuff like oriental rugs and silver and crystal stuff that's normally not at a cabin. But I made my home again. When not working in the frosty forest to cut firewood, I spend long hours in these surroundings, my cabin, in a mustard-yellowed upholstered rocking chair, rhythmic before the fire, turning pages. That rocking chair I talked to you about, I still have it, and it's the rocking chair that my parents rocked us in as babies. So we're all antiques at this point. Tamarack, that's the cat, is on my lap, kneading and nursing my lapel with teeth prickly as his claws until my shirt is soaking wet in a spot he claims as his feline mother's tit. When snow blankets too high to work outside and winter silences the earth, I read out loud just to hear the range of a human voice beyond. Quit it, you sucking little shit! At times, I stand under snowflake showers and yell, is anyone home? Waiting for a reply, I shiver with cold. The wood stove cannot warm away and take a hike or split wood, anything to keep my blood pumping. Other times I read out loud on the porch or stand, hands stuck inside my shirt, the other holding out a hardback copy penned by a Roman emperor long since dead. You have the power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. The words hung inside frosty breath balloons dissipate by the time I realize my damp flannel shirt is frozen stiff. Thawing out before the hearth, I reposition Tamarack on my lap and substitute a great book for a paperback. Americans' beloved cartoonist Charles Schulz, very funny Charles Brown, is a romping page-turner compared to Marcus Aurelius' stoic tome. By December, I've read every book in my personal library, skimming through the classics, and have grown tired of repeating, quit it! As I turn over the same page in one book again and again, my concentration as shifty as the cat nursing my shirt. By January, the soul-shattering silence outside and the thundering babble inside my head leads me to ask, do I leave the cabin, be absorbed into its stupidity, or strangle that cat who is, like me, a needy little suck? I identify with that cat so well I quit talking to it because I know it knows what I'm thinking. I am hearing voices too. A porcelain coffee mug tells me its hard life story. Together, an apple and orange weave an incomparable tale. An antique Japanese vase cries about its displacement after one nuclear bomb exploding. Every single object in and around the cabin has a story to tell, and I talk back to it in ink scratches. When I say I talk back into ink scratches, I was drawing every night by kerosene lamplight at the cabin. Since the first snowfall, I've grown increasingly myopic and can see how dull I've grown in living here. The spirit that guided me to the mountain and the grit and spitfire that drove me to finish building what started with a vision was dying fast as the snow was piling up. So it came with soul-searching hesitation and months of being snowed in to realize I have to leave what led me to the mountains or become consumed by cabin fever. Returning from the weekly supply run, my loaded pack includes a free brochure illustrated with tiny pictures particulated to specific geographic spots on a map. A covered wagon marks John Day, and a black seal squats west on a pinpoint named Eugene. And I think about how to connect those two incongruous images separated by Sawtooth mountain range. The cool belly stove is gray and darkens the last covered quarter mile while I scale the snow-humped porch step, and is black as a bat by the time I unload the pack in the buttery light of 4 flaming kerosene lamps. By then, my thinking had settled into a thought. It was time to leave my woodsy home and try out a different spot for just a bit. So we're going to get into, I leave the cabin, I start to go to Eugene, I go back to the cabin. But it was interesting when this book, Self-Portrait, came out, a lot of the comments were from young people who left home and went to a college environment pretty much without the same kind of footing I had. So that was an identification. I had no idea whatever happened with this. So again, we're going to continue Babe in the Woods self-portrait. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Buy the book if you want. Get it online, whatever you want to do. We will see you next week. We've changed venues down here. We will be in my studio, and each week I'll be giving you a different venue of artistic excitement that's coming out. And we have to thank Arturo for doing this, but he says stay hydrated, but my hydration is... Oh, here's my hydration. One thing I want to say, so, I mean, these videos come out like a long time after. I mean, I am, like so many people, like devastated by what's going on in California. I fostered another puppy, and I actually adopted it, and I'm co-adopting it with another person because it's hard for me to have 3 dogs. And I also put my name on a list to adopt some of the pets from California. If you can figure out, like, if you can't take an animal the whole time, figure out if, like, you can co-adopt with somebody. So when I go to the cabin, I can't take this new puppy up to the cabin because it will get eaten. So the deal was, when I go up to the cabin, this other surrogate puppy mother will take the puppy. If you guys can reach out to any of those people in California or anywhere and figure out a way, maybe you can like co-adopt, just so you don't have to have a pet euthanized or stuck into a shelter. Anyway, that's kind of hard, but it's hard right now. Stay hydrated. See you next week. Bye-bye.